Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going over the new spoilers that came out today. Of course, as you guys probably already know, they've been coming out with spoilers for Legends of Runeterra, and today they released a new keyword with some new Yeti cards. So the keyword is Behold. Behold says bonus if you have a type of card in hand or play. This specific keyword is going to affect deck construction a lot. It reminds me a lot of the Allegiance keyword, where you have to have met a specific requirement to get a bonus effect, which is super powerful, but you also have to meet the deck requirements, and affects how you're going to build decks. And I am super excited to mess around with this keyword. So first we have Faces of the Old Ones, a 2-mana 0/2 that says round start, if you behold an 8+ cost card, get an extra mana gem. So this sounds a lot like Wording Stones, where you get an extra mana gem each round. Now this card is only 2 mana compared to that, but it also requires that you have an 8+ card in hand. And of course the effect is exactly the same. You get an extra mana gem only that round at the round start. So this is exactly like Wording Stones, but with 2 less health and actually requiring you to have an 8-cost card in hand, but it's 1 less mana. This is actually a huge change. It doesn't seem like that at first, but the fact that it's 2 mana and gives you a turn 3, you have 4 mana turn 3, right? So you can make a 4-cost play turn 3. That's huge, especially for decks that want to be playing more expensive cards, and even just basic Freljord decks that want to curve out higher. And, this is really going to help mid-range decks and even control decks that just want to get, be able to play more expensive cards and get more value faster. And I think this card's actually going to be insane, like better than Wording Stones because of its 2 cost. You can play a 4-drop turn 3, or you can even just save spell mana, more spell mana, I mean, for spells if you're playing a mid-range deck and need that, Fury of the North, that interaction, or if you're playing a control deck and need that extra mana for some Frostbite or something like that. And the fact that it requires you to have an 8-cost card usually is not going to be a big deal, especially if they're going to add more 8-cost cards to the game. I know Leviathan's an 8+ cost card, Progress Day is an 8+ cost card, so there's a lot of cards that meet this requirement and actually are pretty good for this strategy. So I definitely think this card is going to be pretty good, better than Wording Stones at the very least. So next we have Troll Scavenger. Troll Scavenger is a 2-mana 1/3 that says when I'm summoned, if you behold, have an 8-cost card in hand, grant me +3 attack. So this is a 4/3. Now granted, it would be much better if it were a 3/4. And I've talked about this in my last video. Health matters way more than attack. It means it can block even just 1 additional time. It takes an extra spell from your opponent to kill it. 3 health really is not that hard to deal with for a P&Z deck, although other decks it could be more of a struggle. Noxian Fervor and Noxus can kill it. But definitely a 4/3 for 2 mana is going to be pretty powerful. The fact that this is a 4/3 for 2 mana is going to hit some spots in some mid-range, even some more aggressive decks. Although I have a hard time seeing it being an aggressive card because of the fact that you have to have an 8-cost card in hand. Like, unless you're purposely playing an 8-cost card just for the Behold effect, it's kind of hard to make this work in a aggro deck. But in a mid-range deck, it could very well work. You're going to have to pick some 8-drops for that deck, and the mid-range decks don't usually play that high of a cost. Maybe control decks are going to need this 4 power dude turn 2 to block and force out some better trades. I don't know. I'm definitely excited to see where this card goes. A little bit more clunky than Faces of the Old Ones, but definitely an interesting card. So next we have Troll Ravager, a 4-mana 3/5 that says when I'm summoned, if you behold an 8+ cost card, grant me regeneration. A 4-cost 3/5 is not that big of a deal, although it is great stats for a deck that wants to slow down the game a little bit, or just want, 3 power is a lot. There's not a lot of 4-cost units with 4 health. And, even if there are, we also have some, synergies that can, deal with that. Gems can give this guy extra attack. But 3 attack is actually enough to kill almost everything that your opponents can be putting out. And if they're a control deck, they have to put in a Get Excited Mystic Shot or just a very expensive Thermo Beam to kill this on curve, or else they just can't deal with it because of the regeneration. It keeps gaining its health back, and it actually forces control decks to make some awkward plays. And I think that this card is amazing in the deck. It can stall out. It can make great blocks against 4 power dudes, even 5 power dudes if you give them an extra health. Freljord does that actually quite a bit. This almost reminds me of a Braum. It's not Braum power level, but it is very similar to Braum on defense, where it can just take a good block. And the fact that he has more power than Braum means he's actually very strong. Like, if you gave him Challenger like Braum, this card is ridiculous. So I definitely think this card has a lot of potential for mid-range decks and even control decks that want to use his big body and the fact that he has regeneration to make him a very hard threat to deal with. Like, it is insane how hard this card is to deal with. So I definitely think this card is going to be very playable and competitive. Like, I'd be surprised if I don't see this card very often. The fact that you have to have an 8-cost card does make him a little bit worse. And, you know, you have to sort of make sure you can get that. But if you do get that, and you are able to have that 8-cost card in hand reliably, this card is busted. And, of course, we'll have to talk about what 8-cost cards there are for the Behold effect. You're going to have to be playing those cards to get the effects, so we're going to have to talk about that. So next, we have Uzgar the Ancient, an 8-mana 7/7 with Challenger regeneration. So, it's obvious what they're doing here. Anyway, this is an 8-mana 7/7 with Challenger and regen. This card is absolutely, he's okay. The best thing I can compare this to is Savage Reckoner, which is a 7/4 Challenge Overwhelm for 7. This card is so much better than that, though. Having 7 health and regeneration means it's going to be impossible to deal with unless your opponent has some hard removal. So Will of Ionia, the new Whimsy card. Let's see, you have what else do you have? You have Vengeance. You have basically anything that does hard removal will kill this, but anything else doesn't. And if your opponents don't answer this, if you're going up against another mid-range deck, this card is going to be pretty good at taking out their creatures and giving you a very strong board. Now, if you're not going against a mid-range deck, you're going against Control, which has hard removal for this. If you're going against P and Z, they actually have a harder time having hard removal. But if they're playing Ionia or Shadow Isles, this card is actually an 8-mana, 8-mana card in your deck that is kind of playable, right? The fact that there's Thermo Beam, the fact that there's Will of Ionia, the fact that there's Vengeance, all means that this card is actually going to have a very hard time being competitive level. But he does count as an 8-cost creature or card for the Behold effect. He is pretty good in a mid-range deck, and actually is good for a mid-range counter, but in the matchups where you're going against a control deck or an aggro deck, he just doesn't hit, enough spots, right? Aggro doesn't care about an 8/8. They're already killing you by that turn. Control decks can kill this pretty easily and pretty consistently, so I doubt this card's actually going to hit unless we're in a very mid-range meta where you have to counter that. And the only reason this card's playable even in a mid-range meta is because it counts as the 8-cost card. You do have to pick 8-cost cards for the effect to work, and this can just be one of them in some very specific situations. So next we have Troll Chant, a 2-mana burst speed. Give an ally 2 health this round, and give an enemy -2 power this round. This card is... Okay, it's hard to write this card for sure. 2 health is insane. Like, that is ridiculous. You can heal an ally for 2 health. It's basically an elixir of iron for 1 extra mana that also has another effect onto it. So it is a bit more, I don't know if this is going to be elixir of iron. Elixir of iron's pretty good because it's only 1 mana, so you just have to, save spell mana turn 1, and then turn 2, turn 3, you can still make your plays on turn, and then use that elixir of iron to save a dude. This is going to require you to pay 1 extra mana, which is actually super hard for mid-range and especially aggro decks. I doubt aggro decks will want this card. It doesn't do extra damage. And Freljord hasn't really been an aggro region in the past. It's definitely been a mid-range and control region. For mid-range, this card is going to be clunky. Elixir of Iron, like I said, only costs 1 mana, so you can save mana turn 1. In a mid-range deck, you don't want to be missing 2 and 3 and even 4 drops just so you can play a Troll Chant. I mean, like, Fear of the North, you can save mana for that because that's a big tempo swing. Troll Chant is small. It's basically half of a Fury of the North with a sort of a weird condition even, where it can't actually kill the opponent's creature. It can save yours and then stop your, it can stop. It's weird because it can actually save both of your allies. If opponent's creature has attack enough to kill your ally, you can give it less attack and then give your other ally extra health. So it's basically saved 2 dudes. It's double Elixir of Iron rather than half of a Fury North, which is +2/+2. It's actually 2 Elixir of Irons for the cost of 1. Here's the thing. Mid-range decks don't want 2 Elixir of Irons. They want 1 at most. Like, Ashe Sejuani right now would not play this card because the Elixir of Iron saves your dude, but you don't want to be saving 2 of them. You only really care about 1 of your allies. Especially that early in the game and late in the game, Fear of the North is a better option. So, unless you're planning to go wide and really need to trade down the board and save your allies for later, this card is going to be too clunky, more clunky than Elixir and Iron, and it's going to be very, bad for those types of decks. Now, if you're in a control deck that maybe you're playing Spiders with Freljord, I don't know, this card could potentially be good. I think that it's hard for this card to be good in a control deck because you're not usually wanting to keep your dudes alive. You're not trying to keep the board. So I think this is just going to be a bad card. The next card we have is Call of the Wild. Call of the Wild is a 3-mana burst speed spell that states for the top 4 cards of your deck. Draw each Yeti, Poro, and Elnuk. Shuffle the rest into your deck. This card is super interesting. So it says, from the top 4, draw all the Yetis, Poros, and Elnuks in there. Elnuks, this actually means that Elnuks, I don't know, they're going to have to print more Elnuks in order to make the Elnuk strategy actually good. Because right now, even this card itself can't hit enough Elnuks consistently in order to make it good. But if they print more Elnuks, that strategy could actually be pretty viable. Now, Poros, they have a lot of Poros and a lot of Poro synergies, but Poros are relatively weak without, Poro snacks and without a good synergy around them. This card draws you cards, but you don't need that. You have Aurora Borealis to do that, and this card, only going through the top 4, is going to be hard. It's going to be hard for it to be good in Poro decks, especially when they want to be curving out and are going to basically ignore this card because it costs too much for its weak effect. Now, Yetis, maybe. Yetis obviously don't have good card draw. This card could be pretty strong if you're playing a Yeti synergy. Basically, all the Behold cards we've seen earlier in this video have been Yetis. So, at least I believe they've been Yetis. Oh, man. Which means that you don't want to actually be playing this turn 3. You won't even be playing this turn 4 or 5. 3-drop slots clearly open. But you're going to want to be filling that with something no matter what if you're playing mid-range. If you're playing control, Yetis are just not actually going to work very well. And if you're playing a control deck, this card's going to be bad card draw. You have so many other options. So I just have a hard time seeing this card being viable. Now, in an Elnuk strategy, I definitely think this could be good, especially because Elnuks can cheat themselves out into play. You might want to be drawing into some more often. You can actually pay that mana more often. So I definitely think this card could be good in an Elnuk strategy, but the rest, it's just going to have a hard time making sense. All right, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I sure love the Behold synergy. And I'll be talking about some decks that I'm going to be theory crafting or brewing or whatever in the future about the Behold strategy. And, of course, about the other 2 sort of strategies we have, which would be the Lulu strategy and the Taric strategy. I'll do that video sometime in the future talking about those things. But for now, guys, this is going to be it. See you next time. Bye.